Imagine playing a high-stakes game. What if the winning move isn't outsmarting your opponent, but convincing them you're crazy enough to flip the table entirely? That is the seductive core of the Madman Theory, the idea that sheer, unpredictable volatility can force a rival to surrender before a single shot is fired. Richard Nixon didn't invent volatility, but in 1969 he tried to formalize it into a doctrine. He wanted to weaponize his own unpredictability. Alongside his national security advisor, Henry Kissinger, Nixon deployed this extreme diplomatic ploy to try and force an end to the grinding conflict in Vietnam. On paper, it reads like a stroke of strategic genius. You take human volatility, usually a massive liability, and you engineer it into a calculated tool to terrify your enemies into a peace treaty. To actually execute this ploy, you have to follow a strict set of operational rules. First, the threat has to be delivered through private back-channel networks. This guarantees plausible deniability. If the enemy calls the bluff, the leader needs the ability to quietly retreat without looking weak on the global stage. You project an aura of absolute danger in secret meetings, while maintaining the composed image of a rational statesman in front of the cameras. It operates exactly like a magic trick. The illusion only holds up if the general public never sees the wires, and the moment the audience catches on, the leverage evaporates. Half a century later, Donald Trump revived the theory almost by name, but the application completely inverted. Where Nixon relied on dark rooms and whispered warnings, Trump broadcast his threats of total destruction to the entire planet on social media. That shift completely destroys the foundational rule of the bluff. When you threaten a foreign nation on a highly visible public timeline, plausible deniability is gone. The entire world is now watching to see if you will actually do it. The domestic and international pressure to make good on that threat skyrockets. By performing volatility in public, a leader traps themselves. Their only remaining options are to escalate to actual violence or back down and humiliate themselves in front of voters. The target of the bluff matters too. Mid-century Vietnam was largely isolated from global trade networks. Early 21st century Iran is deeply integrated into the global economy. If a leader acts on a volatile threat against a nation controlling massive energy reserves, a few weeks of bombing doesn't just isolate the enemy, it triggers outright oil shortages and aggressive global inflation. That initial shockwave is followed by years of infrastructure collapse and mass refugee exoduses, crises that spill over borders and destabilize neighboring regions. You cannot isolate the damage. When the target is tied into the global system, carrying out a mad threat inflicts catastrophic economic pain on your own allies. There is a fatal Dame Theory paradox built directly into this strategy. On one side, if the threat is so extreme that it risks nuclear war or economic collapse, the enemy simply won't believe you will pull the trigger. The bluff fails because it lacks credibility. On the other side, if you actually carry out the threat to prove you aren't bluffing, the strategy has failed by definition. You haven't forced peace. You've just started a devastating war. This trap is especially lethal for democracies. Autocratic enemies can read open public opinion polls. They can see exactly how much domestic support a leader actually has to sustain a violent conflict. The theory is paralyzed by its own extremes. It functions as either an unbelievable lie or a literal catastrophe. Despite these flaws, the idea persists. Defenders often point to the 1980s, arguing that Ronald Reagan's highly aggressive nuclear posture successfully intimidated the Soviets into folding. You hear similar arguments today. Claims that Vladimir Putin refrained from launching major foreign invasions during Donald Trump's unpredictable term in office. But this requires ignoring the broader timeline. Putin attacked Georgia under Bush, took Crimea under Obama, and launched a full invasion of Ukraine under Biden. A 4-year gap is a statistical fluke, not evidence of deterrence. Stringing together a few coincidences makes for a compelling political narrative, but it provides a dangerously thin foundation for high-stakes statecraft. To see the actual track record, we have to look back at the men who formalized the theory. Nixon and Kissinger operated in absolute secrecy against a country of little global economic significance, actively bombing Cambodia and Laos, and it still achieved next to nothing. The North Vietnamese eventually took Saigon anyway. Over 20,000 Americans died in Vietnam while this framework was in place. We often want to see hidden genius in chaotic behavior. We look for the calculated moves behind the bravado, but history points to a much harsher reality. Unpredictable madness isn't a strategy, it's just a trap.